Favorite song. Written by Hot Salsa Cold Chips. Read by Arashi. Throw another. I dare you. Maki whispered just loud enough for her classmate behind her to hear. Kokichi gasped quietly, raising a hand to his chest and dropping his jaw, feigning shock, before smiling wide and snickering to himself. So rude, he murmured. I wonder if our teachers know how much of a bully you are. Someone should put you in timeout, Maki roll. Maki glared ahead, eyes focused on nothing, willing herself not to turn around and lash out in the middle of class. Kokichi had thrown one too many balled-up sticky notes at her hair, and she was starting to reach her limit. Most had very poorly drawn doodles of what Maki could only assume were Kokichi and other random classmates, along with hearts, also poorly drawn, and whatever unimportant message Kokichi wanted to pass to her. She had, somehow, tolerated the first 3 or so, but after that, her concentration on her class started to blur, and she began to feel the rage building so fast that she had little time to calm herself. The addition of the childish nickname only made it worse. How the hell did she get stuck sitting next to Kokichi anyway? What even were the chances she'd be anywhere near him? Kokichi, either oblivious to her anger or truly nonchalant about it, had draped himself over his desk, now tearing apart the last sticky note with his fingers, looking somewhat bored. Maki was unsure how their teacher hadn't noticed his antics yet, but she was at least glad that the threat she made seemed to stick. Despite the obvious differences between Maki and Kokichi, however, they did have one thing in common. Neither of them were paying attention to the lecture. At least Maki had an excuse. It's hard to focus when you have an idiot hunched over your shoulder, agonizing you for no reason other than it's fun. Remembering her desire to actually do well in school, Maki zoned back into the lecture, ready to attempt to listen to whatever boring information was being rambled about. Is why no one should be getting a poor grade on this assignment. You'll all get full credit as long as you actually choose to participate, the professor explained. Just another assignment. Nothing special. Whatever it is, it'll probably be easy enough for now. It's only been, a month since school began? And remember, the professor continued, refusing to interact with your partner will also result in points being deducted. The point of this project is to bond with your classmates. You'll be stuck with each other for the next few years anyway. Might as well start getting along now. A partner project. That's new. Maki flinched as another paper note hit the back of her head. This time, she turned her head to look over her shoulder and glare at Kokichi instead of staring aimlessly forward. Her glare was rather intense as well, as if she was only seconds away from lunging at him. Refusing to be deterred, Kokichi made a gesture with his hands, as if minding opening a book, while mouthing the words, "Open it." Maki gazed down at the note on the floor, before slowly reaching to pick it up, occasionally glancing at Kokichi, who had a very dramatic smile plastered to his face, as if testing the waters to see if he'd jump at her. Turning to face forward again, she unfurled the paper, reading the question within in terrible handwriting. Be my partner? The drawing this time was of Kokichi holding a heart. Maki made a show of raising the note in the air for Kokichi to see and tearing it in half. I will now read out the assigned partners. I apologize if you were hoping for someone else, but there will be other projects in the future with opportunities to choose your partners. Maki felt her heart stop as Kokichi gasped. She could picture him behind her, crossing his fingers and smiling like a child. Dear God, don't do this. Korakio Shinguji and Gonta Gokuhara. Maki heard a sound of anticipation from behind her, as if Kokichi was ready to scream. Miu Iruma and Kirumi Tojo. Maki never believed in any superstitions, but now she felt the urge to cross her own fingers and pray. K1B0 and Tsumugi Shirogane. What was that god that Angie always prayed to? Shuichi Saihara and Tenko Chabashira. Just get it over with already. Maki Harukawa and Kaede Akamatsu. Oh, Oh, thank God. Maki breathed a quiet sigh of relief at the same time that Kokichi let out a disappointed whine. Kaito Momota and Kokichi Oma. Kokichi nearly threw himself out of his seat. Maki thought she heard someone groan, but she was completely tuned out of the world by now. Wishing not to get screwed over really takes a lot out of a person. She could, however, make out the sound of Kokichi giggling excitedly. The teacher quickly finished assigning partners and allowed the students the remaining class time to strategize for their project. Kokichi launched himself in Kaito's direction, nearly tackling him. Maki intentionally ignored the yell that followed. With time to herself, Maki now wondered what it was their project was about, since she hadn't caught the direction of what it was. She glanced around the room for any hints, and made contact with her partner in the process. Kaede sat a few seats in front of her to her right, and had shifted to look behind her for Maki. Meeting Maki's eyes, Kaede smiled invitingly. Instinctively, Maki glanced back down at her desk. It only took about half a second for Maki to wonder why she felt the need to avert her gaze. Looking back up, Maki stood. Looking back up, Maki stood, waiting patiently as Kaede weaved her way around the other students to meet the assassin at her desk. Truth be told, Maki hadn't talked to Kaede much since they met on the first day of class. The only interaction they had most days was when Kaede glanced up at Maki in the hallways or during class, shooting her a soft smile or even a wave. Maki usually returned the gesture with a nod or a wave of her own. Frankly, Maki didn't mind this. It wasn't bothersome and never felt inappropriate. A sort of perfect spacing in between friend and classmate. "Hey there, partner," Kaede greeted. Maki hummed in response, unsure of how Kaede found so much energy to seem so kind throughout the day. "Glad I got paired with you." Maki glanced over to Kaito's desk, taking note of how Kokichi was practically grappled to Kaito's shoulders. "The feeling's mutual. So, what's this project about?" I wasn't listening. Kaede giggled. "That's okay. It's not really a project, anyway. Apparently our teacher thought it would be good for us to get to know each other by pairing people up and giving us a class or two a week to meet up in one of our ultimate labs and have fun. He said we would be teaching each other about our talents, too, but everyone's probably gonna goof off anyway. It's basically just extra free time once in a while." "How long will the project last?" "The whole semester," Kaede said excitedly. "We switch partners every once in a while, too, but for now, you're stuck with me. Better get used to it." Maki was surprisingly happy to be stuck with who she was. Not that she'd ever let Kaede know that. "So," Kaede continued, "we should start the project now. Do you want to go to my lab first, or yours?" Maki's eyes widened slightly at that. Right. The project was about meeting her in the classmates' ultimate labs. It only makes sense that she'd have to invite other people into hers. Except Kaede, and none of her other classmates for that matter, knew what her lab looked like. Specifically, they didn't know that it looked like the lab of the ultimate assassin, because she never told them she's the ultimate assassin. When Maki first got accepted into the academy, she'd been accepted as the ultimate assassin, as that was her recognized talent. How they discovered her talent, she'd never know, but she knew it was too good of an opportunity to pass up, even if it did sound suspicious at first. Anything was better than the life she was living beforehand. But if she was really going to attend a normal high school, normal being used liberally, of course, then she couldn't let any of her normal classmates, normal still being used liberally, know anything about who she was. So she fudged some documents and managed to sneak them to every faculty member of the school who was made aware of the incoming class and their talents, one of which being the talent of ultimate child caregiver. It was deceptive, sure, and there were definitely a few higher-ups in the school who could out her unintentionally despite not knowing of the mix-up for now. But she didn't see many other choices. It was for the best. No one would trust a person whose talent was literally killing people. She needed to blend in. And now, blending in meant not letting Kaede into her ultimate lab. Your lab sounds fine, Maki replied bluntly. Oh, interested in learning piano? Kaede almost looked smug, as if she'd gotten Maki to admit to liking something she shouldn't have. Don't make it sound weird. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem like a Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata type of person. Like, even more so than Chopin's Raindrop. I think they'd both suit you, in a way, but I'd bet Moonlight Sonata is definitely more, you. You know what I mean? Just based on your overall energy. Kaede rambled as they walked to her lab. Kaede had been talking about piano and random piano songs Maki had never heard of since they left the classroom. Maki did not, in fact, know what she meant. Where's your lab again? Maki asked, desperately trying to drag the conversation back to something she could understand. Oh, Kaede chirped, it's just over here. Reaching the door to her lab, Kaede pushed it open happily and held it for Maki to make her way inside. The lab was pretty much what Maki had expected. The grand piano, the chalkboard with music compositions, the scattered music sheets clearly demonstrating Kaede's frequent use of the lab, yet lack of desire to keep things properly organized. All of it screamed Maki's idea of Kaede Akamatsu. She didn't know her well, sure, but she felt her occasional interactions conveyed more than enough telling information. Pretty cool, right? Kaede flaunted. I can't even tell what music sheets on the ground are supposed to go where. Maki deadpanned. This place is a mess. Oh, come on. It's just well loved, that's all. I bet your lab's no better. Maki fought a mild rise of anxiety upon remembering that Kaede still has no clue who she is. She'll have to find a way to tell Kaede that she can't visit her lab. Eventually. Somehow. Maki walked around her lab, trying her best to avoid slipping on the papers below her feet. There wasn't all that much to take in, but Maki did think that the massive wall of DVDs and music scores was somewhat impressive, considering sheer size alone. Or maybe that's just what all rooms meant for playing music looked like. Maki wouldn't know. You can take one if you like, Kaede offered, noticing Maki's interest in the DVDs. I have way too many anyways. I'm not taking your stuff. It's not like I need it. Kaede hummed in response, making a mental note for an idea for later. For now, though, she and Maki had 30 minutes to kill, and Kaede was going to make sure Maki enjoyed at least part of it. Before Maki knew it, she was being tugged by Kaede into the center of the room. What is it with this girl and dragging Maki around? Kaede held a firm grip on her arm as she brought Maki atop a raised platform, urging her to take a seat on the bench in front of the grand piano. Maki did so reluctantly, with Kaede soon joining her, both of them now sharing the long bench. Maki? Kaede now faced her with half-lidded eyes and hands folded neatly in her lap, speaking to her with a confident smile. Maki struggled to take it seriously. What's your favorite song? Maki blinked. That's it? She almost expected something more intense. And yet? Why do you ask? Because I want to play it for you, Kaede beamed. Unless you want to learn how to play it yourself, then maybe I can teach you. I'm not the best teacher, but I could try. The offer was sickeningly heartwarming, and Maki could tell by the look in Kaede's eyes that it really was an attempt at being friendly with her. She hardly knew how to process it. She barely knew Kaede, and yet, despite being forced into spending time with a girl who showed nothing but neutrality at best towards her, Kaede kept approaching her in such a tender way whenever she had the chance. Maki wasn't sure what she'd done to make the pianist so interested in her, or if Kaede was just as caring towards everyone she knew. Maybe Kaede wasn't interested in her at all, and Maki was just misunderstanding the situation. Then again, this was yet another topic Maki wouldn't know much about. She had never gotten accustomed to how friends normally act after her separation from her orphanage. Maki was good at hiding it, but on the inside, she was scrambling to figure out how to react. In the end, though, she reacted the first way she thought to brush off the pianist's kindness completely. What's that writing over there? Maki asked, looking over Kaede's shoulder to the chalkboard with random music compositions. Changing the subject was the best distraction she could come up with. Kaede glanced behind her. Oh, that? That's just a couple of Oh, that? That's just a couple of ideas I was working on. Nothing special. Kaede met her eyes again, rubbing the back of her neck with her hand. Her smile seemed somewhat embarrassed. Maki assumed it must have been at least somewhat special. You write music? Not really. Sometimes I just jot a few ideas down for later. It's probably easy to tell I was struggling a bit with that one. Kaede looked back at the chalkboard, frantic smudges and question marks making its messiness even more evident. After a moment, she shook her head dismissively. But that's not important. Tell me your favorite song. Pretty please? I don't really have a favorite song, Maki huffed. What? Kaede replied, incredulous, before a look of understanding overtook her features. Oh! Is it because you have multiple favorites and can't choose? I totally get that. I'm the same way. You just tell me any song you like then. I don't have any favorites. I really wasn't into music before coming here. Really? So, you don't even like Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata? The look on the other girl's face was filled with more disappointment than Maki could expect from learning about a subject as ridiculous as music she likes. It almost made her feel guilty about nothing important. I've never heard it, she replied, honestly. Well then, we'll have to change that, Kaede decided. She stretched her fingers out over the keys of the piano, preparing to play. I haven't performed this one in a while, so I might be a bit rusty. I hope it doesn't take away from the experience. Wait, Kaede? Maki interrupted. The girl looked back at her quizzically. What's up? Why did this almost feel embarrassing? She's just gonna have to suck it up. Can you play the song you wrote? Kaede flushed red. Huh? The one on the board. I'd like to hear it. The look of genuine surprise Maki received in response was making her feel awkward. Why is she making such a big deal out of it? It's just a song. Kaede scrambled to form a coherent reply. But it's not even finished, and the first bridge sounds really choppy, and the rhythm overall could really use some restructuring. I don't care. It's a song you wrote, so I want to hear you play it. Was that too straightforward? That's... Maki couldn't meet the girl's eyes. You don't have to. No, I want to. Go on then. The pianist took a deep breath, as if to calm herself down, turning back towards the instrument in front of her, and working her hands back to their rightful place. For a moment, Maki thought she'd changed her mind. What filled the room instead of music was the dreadful sound of silence, a sound so overwhelming that it formed an entirely new ball of stress in her stomach that weighed heavy on her body. It was only looking back on it that she realized just how foolish it was for her to get anxiety over something like this, especially considering all of the other things she had to worry about, especially considering she wasn't even sure what it was that was making her so uncomfortable. Then, slowly, a soft melody drowned out the quiet, replacing it with something new. It wasn't a complicated song. At least, Maki didn't think it was. She didn't have much else to compare it to, after all. Despite its simplicity, however, the girl still thought it was incredible. It had a certain flow to it, a type that suited Kaede, she figured. It was as if it could pull the listener along, the rhythm smooth and unusually powerful, but never unpleasant. Though Kaede had said it was unfinished, the song continued for a few minutes before suddenly cutting short. Clearly, she had much more in mind for it than what was written on the chalkboard. Still, Maki thought it was over too soon. "You can be brutally honest," Kaede said, a few moments after it was over. I know it's not as good as it could be." She could still hear the melody playing endlessly in her head. She wondered if it would be weird if she asked to hear it again. Still lost in the sound of the music which had long since faded away, it took her a second to realize she still had to give Kaede her thoughts. She voiced them then, the only way she could, by giving a neutral, almost dull response that she regretted not putting more thought into. "I liked it." It was as if it took a second for the other girl to register the few words she spoke. But when she did, an obviously very content, very excited smile graced her lips, and a glimmer of something Maki wasn't familiar with before then lit up her eyes. It was a soft expression, and one that felt as genuine as the person wearing it. The assassin thought that she could get used to something so kind being directed towards her, as strange and abnormal as it felt, for now. "Oh, Maki!" Kaede hummed. "You're gonna make me blush!" Maki realized far too late that the feeling was mutual, raising a hand to play with her twin tails and turning to face another direction. "All I said was that I liked it." The pianist giggled. She turned to glance at the clock, checking how much time they had left. "You know, I could play a few more songs if you'd like. You still need to hear Moonlight Sonata and Raindrop after all. I don't think I could let you leave knowing you haven't even listened to them once." The other girl rolled her eyes. "You're lucky I'm stuck here with you." Kaede laughed again, and Maki couldn't help the smile that formed at the sound. Then, just as she calmed down, a look of realization crossed the blonde's features. "Oh, before I forget." She stood from her place at the bench, leaving the platform to search through a section of DVDs, eventually returning with two that she offered to her partner. "For you." She glanced over the discs' cases, noticing the familiar names written in marker. She sighed and feigned annoyance. "I haven't even heard these yet. You don't even know if I'll want to hear them again." "After I play them, I'm sure you'll be hooked. I don't know a single person who doesn't like Beethoven and Chopin." "If you're wrong about your guess, then you're about to meet one." "I know I won't be." Kaede settled back down on the bench next to Maki, looking at her friend with something akin to appreciation. The other girl met her gaze. "I wanted to give you copies of your favorite songs, but since you don't have any, I hope these will do." She was wrong. Maki did have one favorite song, but she'd prefer to wait until it was finished before she'd ask for it to be put onto a DVD. So she'd just have to accept what she was given. She knew she'd end up liking it anyway.